Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is Don Murdoch, and I'm going to be doing a talk this afternoon here at the RSA conference on adversary simulation. We're going to go through this process, and what we want to be able to do throughout this presentation is help you close the gaps in your security posture. So by way of introduction, I've been in IT for well over 25 years, about 17 years in information security, and I received what I would affectionately call my digital combat training in the wild, wild west of academic computing over that 17-year period. I spent several years in there and only had a brief stint out of InfoSec where I did some strategy and planning for a large organization. A lot of experience in commercial, defense, nonprofit, and I ran a cyber range for a major university. I'm a SANS instructor, and also I'm the author of something you may have heard called the Blue Team Handbook, kind of a well-known information security book out there in the space. I'm currently functioning as the principal security architect for RSA. So the first thing I want to go over is, what is your value chain? And this is not the typical IT security topic. I wanted to begin with this discussion because we need to be business relevant in the IT security space. And the business owners, the people that we work for, senior management, really want to understand how each one of their departments are being business relevant. So by definition, a formal definition, I put this here to kind of focus this in, is a value chain are whatever the activities that your organization does in a specific industry in order to either transform raw materials into a goods and service, or have the right staff and the right service offerings in order to offer a service in your industry in the market. Michael Porter is the creator of this term. So why do we care, and why are we starting off with a business specific term? First and foremost, if you understand your value chain, it's a ready-made catalog of the possible points of exposure in your organization. It also gives you a roadmap for the systems that interact with the value chain, the systems that store the data in the value chain, and perhaps today, especially where the value chain interacts with other organizations through some kind of web service or information exchange, anything like that. When you understand and you can do things that understand the value chain, you're proving that you're being relevant to your business, or you're being business relevant. And lastly, it also really tells you, as you look in your environment of the systems that you're going to perform adversary simulation on or with, what you can absolutely not adversely affect. And it helps you to define that. If you are a manufacturing firm that has some automation in your manufacturing space, say robotics or something along those lines, you would want to know that that industrial control equipment is probably not a good, safe target for your adversary simulation activity. So remember that the blue team defends it while the red team emulates attacks who try to do these things every single day. Where can you get some of this information? Your business continuity team is a great partner in understanding the components of your value chain and application and asset priority. Your disaster recovery team probably has a lot of those details to help you. So always start with value chain. And our security architecture and what we're going to be testing or exercising through an adversary simulation process protects that value chain. You have to think like an adversary, a red teamer, to find the threats, and you have to act blue to design and test the defenses. You'll see this theme a few times in my talk here. By the way, as I'm going through this, I forgot to mention, as you have questions, please make sure that you ask those questions in the chat, because I'll be able to answer them for you real time during the talk and when it's given live. People and processes. In your adversary simulation process, you may really want to find out, is there a people or process that you're going to test, or is there a lot of technology that you're going to test? You could look at this and say, one of the processes that we have is creating service test tickets for application access. And maybe I can, in my adversary simulation, perhaps I'm doing an insider threat adversary simulation activity. Maybe I actually want to test the ability to manipulate access control requests and possibly gain access to a system that way, rather than using a technical exploit. The other half of the security architecture that protects our value chain are all the various technologies that we use: proxies, DNS protection, endpoint detection and response agents, application firewalls, application aware firewalls, how our networks are built, what's in our cloud systems. So these things protect the value chain, and they're all in scope for integrating them into an adversary simulation. Historically, a lot of these activities were really performed in isolation. Today, we tend to integrate when we're performing these activities. Historically, you have red team performing an offensive operation. They tend to do that in isolation and silos, while blue teams are defending. You'll see a lot of these activities, and we call them purple teaming today. That's kind of the in vogue term. So purple teaming is where you perform a red action and a blue action right after it, with the goal of looking at attack, defense. Can you detect? Can you improve defenses based on a particular attack? And it's a very short cycle. That's not really what adversary simulation is about. I have a definition on the next slide. You'll also see here two things I put in yellow to call out. We have to understand that today attackers think in graphs and defenders think in lists. We on the defense side think about the list of resources, the list of networks, the list of elevated accounts, the list of users who we have to protect. Attackers don't think that way. They gain some kind of a toehold, and when they have that toehold, they figure out where they can go from that toehold. And so they go to system A. What can system A talk to? System B. System B can talk to system C, D, and E, and they have to map your network out. So remember that we think differently, and that should be incorporated in your plan. From a formal definition, and this is from a colleague of mine, Jake Williams, who runs Rendition InfoSec. In adversary simulation, where a red team member or a designated attacker, an approved person, is conducting some kind of assessment and in making every effort to try to use the tools and techniques by a specific adversary, a named adversary, someone that we have some description of out there. This is different than threat emulation red teams. They could use anything they want. So adversary emulation and simulation is behaving like a particular attacker, probably an organization that is specifically targeting your industry. In purple, it's a different ball of wax. I just wanted to make sure that we had these definitions because you'll see them a lot and they sound similar. So if you break it down, our noun is our opponent, and that helps us to focus our attention in a dispute. An antagonist, someone coming against us. If you are a government military organization and you're listening to this talk, you have obvious opponents. They are governmental organizations and militaries that would be in opposition to your foreign policy. If you're a commercial entity, it may be another organization in your commercial sector. And to emulate is a verb to strive to be equal. So therefore, think red, test blue, act blue, as if you're simultaneously attacking and defending the network. I have a brief diversion here for the term breach and attack simulation software. When you read about these things, you may come across BAS software applications out there. BAS is not true adversary simulation. Many of these tools that do BAS, or breach and attack simulation, exercise a particular part of your security apparatus. So if you think about phishing testing and phishing techniques testing, where there's a number of vendors that have tools that will test your anti-phishing defenses, or test your staff, or see if your antivirus things can pick stuff up. Those are mission-specific tools. So they're not specific to humans behaving like red teams. Just be aware of that as you're going and doing research and determining how to build your program out. So you have to have a plan. The first thing is your plan when you build an adversary simulation event. Think about a learning outcome. You want to test and have a use case where you're testing an insider threat or a company in opposition to you who may gain action, who wants to seal the secret sauce. If you are Pepsi, maybe you could pretend to be Coke, or vice versa. Or if you're an architectural company, maybe another architectural company may want to invade your network. But you have to have some kind of an outline and a plan. So we want to achieve an outcome. We want to improve the knowledge of our environment, improve the skills of our staff, and improve the ability of the red team to perform technical attacks and the blue team to defend technical attacks. So we have very specific outcomes. It is really worth it to think about you're writing a big picture lab or a big lab. Come up with your scenario, write out the objectives, do the outline, figure out what controls are going to be tested, what your written outcomes are. Make sure that you have a scoring vehicle. Did the red team perform all 20, 30, 40 steps? Did they gain the expected result? Did the blue team detect all 40 steps? Maybe they only detect 10, which maybe that meant that the red team was very effective, unless, of course, they happened to have been the first 10 and the blue team was actually monitoring. So where blue team engages is also something that you want to achieve in understanding when you're done. You should include some things ahead of time. Your own fearless knowledge, skills, and abilities assessment. Do you have enough knowledge to do this? Do you need to go get some more help? Can you cook up an adversary simulation and then maybe use a third party to actually conduct it who may have more technical skill? They may be doing those sorts of things more often. And fearlessly look at your people, process, and technology. Start small too. Don't think about, for our first adversary simulation product, we're going to try and then come up with something really grandiose. Just start small. These are skills and muscles that you're going to develop. Another point here I wanted to point out is that sometimes these things are not as simple as you would think. So if you kind of compare this to adult education, maybe you're creating a complex security course and you want to have a really great, adversary lab, if you will. There's a lot of professional education organizations that tell us to develop a solid hour of adult content and lab exercises that go with that can be anywhere from 23 to 143 labor hours to make that lab exercise a really useful one. So that's kind of something that we can kind of use in our planning and thinking about how much time we have to commit. If you are an organization that uses timesheets, it really might be a good idea to actually have a timesheet charge for this so that you can know how much one of these things takes place. How and where do you start? So the first thing that you want to understand is the MITRE ATT&CK framework, well known, provides a really good outline for us and a really good structured process to understand the attack sequence. Exploring the network, finding, attempting privilege escalation, all those sorts of things. The next thing from that is you have to have an emulation plan. And I'm going to show you the MITRE APT3 plan, which they provide on their website. So the APT3 plan is a Excel document. And when you look at this particular plan, they give you in the plan commands that this particular adversary group runs in a sense of order. And there's different ways to perform these types of commands. They've given you a commercial tool, Cobalt Strike. They've given you a command to use in an open source tool called Metasploit, and built-in Windows commands. There's a description on the right-hand side, and there's quite a bit of information in here that goes on and on and on. Privilege escalation, what will they do? Credential theft, what are the kind of things this particular attack group does? And then we've got this last one here, maintaining persistence. So in understanding what's going on, this is a very, very useful tool for you, and it's a great place to start. Once you've developed some kind of a plan, how are you going to gain support for doing this? First and foremost, as you build and exercise an adversary simulation plan, you're going to end up maximizing your security spend, and you're going to be able to test lots of things in your security spend. Well-structured events should exercise most of the security in the technology stack. All of your stakeholders are brought together. Your defensive teams, your IT support, your internal red team functions, your application security teams, your AppSec folks, your vulnerability management teams. They can all be brought together through one of these exercises. You want to ensure that all of your controls, process, technical, SOC monitoring, blue team, all those operational controls are working. Are they configured well? You want to find errors and weaknesses before anyone else finds those errors and weaknesses, especially if that person who could be finding your weakness or attacking your network is in fact an insider. And that is a real thing. Doesn't happen as much as we think, but it's common enough to have an insider that having an insider threat emulation scenario would be very, very useful. I created one of these for a company recently, and we ran the exercise, and we actually had a willing partner in the organization who pretended to be the manager of an intern. And we had the scenario that if I hired an intern, we don't know them too well. Maybe if they're bad apples and they came into the organization, can we detect them early? And how would we go about finding the intern? And where is the intern? So we took a person in our organization and we got them to help us out to emulate kind of an insider threat. MITRE provides a solid framework. And the other thing I wanted to tell you is that with a little bit of documentation effort, you can create some really nice, audit or compliance supporting artifacts. Many of the audit and compliance standards out there and the auditing process is looking to determine, is your organization improving its security posture every year, or on a year-over-year basis? Did you do something to test your incident response plan? Going down one of these program paths can be very, very helpful at that. So if you want to run an AdSim project, what's the next thing that you need to know? You have to have the roles. You have to know who's playing red, white, blue, green. Willing partners are very helpful. Define the use cases. Look at MITRE ATT&CK as a good example. Figure out what skills you need to develop, whether or not you have right tooling knowledge. Is there something that you're going to retire in your organization and you want to test it, or you're going to retire something as a result? Proof of technical controls. So do you want to know that the firewall works, for instance, is a really good example. Many next generation firewalls today now can have the capability to detect DNS exfiltration with there's a variety of tools that can do that. So you would actually want to say, as a proof of technical control, we want to exfiltrate data using a number of different DNS exfiltration tools. Does this actually work? And did our tool catch that capability? There's another business term on the right-hand side that I wanted to bring out here, and it's called SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis is something that we do from the business side. We look at whatever it is we want to work on, whether it's a market or developing a new product. We try to identify our organization's strengths. We want to identify our organization's weaknesses. What are the opportunities that we can exploit, and what are the threats? So a little bit of SWOT analysis in the adversary simulation world, you can apply it this way. Our team is really, really good with using that EDR tool that we put in place last year. So maybe we need to figure out some other way of getting onto the network. Maybe there's an opportunity there. The Linux machines aren't covered with the EDR tool. Maybe if we establish our initial foothold and we don't do anything really bad, but we gain access to a Linux machine because we don't have an EDR tool there, that might be a great way for us to gain further access to our network. So use that a little bit. I'm a big fan of isolated labs for doing these activities. Detection Lab is a great tool as an example. With just one script, you can install a variety of tools. About a day later, you get a pretty good environment. Security Onion has a really nice detection tool set for you. Doesn't cost hardly anything to install, and it's well supported if you wanted commercial support for that too. You have to think of these things as, your scenario, and your information will flow during your scenario that you're running. You want to be as repeatable and reusable so that you can use the simulation next year and improve. Record keeping is really important, using a team of two approach to make sure that as things occur, one person makes note of things, notes the time, notes the result. So those are very, very important for meeting your scenario objectives. Also, if you listed out, say we use that APT3 plan and we tried to exercise all, I think it's 80 or 90 items in that plan. Did you actually try all 80 or 90? Or 80 or 90 detected? And when did you try them? So making notes in these activities is really, really good. You'll also see on this term a phrase there, to beware of the investigation labyrinth. Each step in the blue team defense process provides a natural pivot point for the investigator. One of my colleagues in the field, Chris Sanders, has done a lot of research in this space. And what he's found is, after observing a lot of security analysts, is people that pivot to packet capture data, or what we call data on the wire, take 40% longer to close a case than people that use other data sources when they're investigating a case. So the natural tendency is to use the richest contextual data that we can, and that tends to be packet capture data. Categorically, that takes longer to solve a case. Instead, people who naturally pivot to other sources to validate whether a single event of interest is or is not an actual contributing component to the simulation, they prove that out yes or no, can help those folks determine if something is or is not an issue more readily in a third the time. So your folks that are doing the defensive side of these things need to be really aware of cognitive bias. And it's one of those things that really hurts the blue team. So you want to make sure that the blue team can solve that case and understand the thought processes that they're going through. You may implement a change as a result of this to contain the breach or the attack. You may have to make sure that when you're going through your adversary simulation, if you have a material change to your network to remediate something, that may require a change control event. So in terms of planning ahead of time, be aware that that's something that you want to do, or plan for, I'm sorry. Make sure at the end that you can perform some root cause analysis. And oftentimes for these events, you want to produce a formal CAP or a corrective action plan. Those are usually measurable targets of things that you need to do in your organization. A couple of axioms here that we want to think about when we're measuring the success of our product, because what cannot be measured cannot be managed. If you're trying to assess an aspect of your program and you don't have a way to measure it, you really can't manage it. And another thing is, not everything that counts can be counted. You may think that there's a particular aspect of how your organization, your operating, your tooling, your staff, how they work, and that may be very, very difficult to measure. So just be aware of that walking into the scenario. I have a variety of metrics in the Blue Team Handbook. I thought I'd give you some of these. We're going to spell some of these out in a few minutes. One of the things that's kind of really important to test every time you do an adversary simulation activity is your time to sweep the enterprise. And that really is testing your network. If you are capable of delivering a binary to an end user system, you want to know how hard or how quickly can we search every single computer on the network for that particular binary, that particular file. And that's something that you want to be improving over time. You say you're in an organization and you have 2,000 nodes in your network, maybe 200 servers, 1,800 workstations, or maybe 1,700 workstations and 5 shared rooms that are used for training or something like that. The composition of all of your networks will change. How long does it take you to check all those machines? How long does it take you to check machines that went out of the network and came back in the network for that test, for that particular binary that you're searching for? So these are a variety of metrics, and I kind of wanted to highlight time to sweep the enterprise because every time you're performing an adversary simulation event, you want to exercise that. There's a couple of key things you want to measure. The MTDT, or the mean time to decision, that is, people also say mean time to detection. That's usually very small because we have SIM platforms that will tell us things. You could measure that if you wanted to. But the mean time to decision is how long it takes an analyst or a SOC person or a SOC analyst or some other person involved in defense to take any event, could be an alarm, could be a particular piece of trace data, and determine if that's true, meaning it's something to pay attention to, or it's a false positive. How long do those decisions take? The next thing that you want to be able to measure is how long does it take to actually compromise a box? From the minute that your red team activity initiates or starts your attack to how long they're capable of actually compromising an end target. If they're coming in from the web, it may take them several hours to actually find an inroad to the network. That could be a very long time. It could be 2 minutes. So we want to know that these are measures, and we want to know how long these things took, because as a result of this, we can figure out if we need to improve defenses. The next thing you have that kind of makes a difference is mean time to privilege escalation. So how long does it actually take someone when they gain some kind of a toehold and go all the way to full compromise where they have elevated access to a target? This is not necessarily immediate. When you quote pop a box, you don't necessarily get domain administrative rights or membership in another elevated group. So you do want to be aware that that's a measure that you want to attain. There's a number of prerequisites you have to successfully measure your program. Make sure that you have good centralized logging. Some of you may or may not have that, but if you're going to test a particular control or a particular technical system, make sure that you've actually got that turned on and it works, because you do want to know. We do want to avoid what we call the coffee break sim. My colleague Justin Henderson talks about this. It's a great phrase for the kind of security platform where you instrument a search and then you push the button to go start the search. Say you're looking for something over the last 24 hours. And behaviorally, you have enough time to walk down to the other end of the building, get a cup of Joe, doctor it up with the appropriate amount of Splenda, the pink stuff, or sugar and creamer, a couple of stirs, say hi to somebody at the water cooler and come back. If it takes your sim that long to give you that answer, that's something that you want to work and avoid and kind of figure out what you can do to solve that. You may or may not have the luxury of an EDR platform. not necessarily organization does, but there's some really great tools from Microsoft that have come out that you can use to better instrument detection on your Windows platform. Sysmon is that tool, has a lot of great visibility. And if you don't own an EDR platform, one of the great things you can do is use Windows Event Collection or Windows Event Forwarding and Microsoft Sysmon to go centrally collect some data onto a central system. So you do have to be aware that your endpoint, your individual workstation, your Windows machine, will probably need some extra instrumentation to give you a really good view of what actually happened on the machine. Network device logs. If you don't have a perimeter packet capture system, Zeek is an open source tool. You can deploy it on a medium class machine with a mirror port and collect really good data. Do you have perimeter NIDs or for not? Those sorts of things. And you got to have people power. One of the things that you need to make these programs really successful is a lot of natural curiosity. People have to be kind of inquisitive. You want to have a lot of patience. That person has to be patient. Not every red team tool or attack tool works correctly every single time. If you think that's the case, you probably haven't used enough. Sometimes they work only half the time. Sometimes they only work 10% of the time, and you have to have patience. You also have to question yourself. Is this technique working or not working? Am I actually detecting what I think I'm detecting? How can I, in the moment, produce a better detection? So I think low ego really helps for person power. Attention to detail makes a lot of difference in the blue team. One of my colleagues, John Hubbard, mentions that his best blue teamer in the SOC that he ran was a librarian because she had great attention to detail and had very structured thinking. And a solid IT background is also very, very helpful. Since the other half of performing the attack is exercising the defense, be aware that there's a variety of services that the SOC will hopefully engage in these processes. As you look at this list, there's a few of these that may cause a financial opportunity for you. If part of your incident response plan is to always capture a machine if the attack looks like it's going to be particularly successful and perform a forensic analysis, that could be a significant amount of labor. If you've outsourced forensics and say you have your willing partner and the defense team comes up and grabs his laptop and says, there's something suspicious, we have to go, and they take that laptop and they're going to send it off to a forensics company immediately, you may or may not want to achieve that as part of your adversary simulation because that could be an expense. As you're looking at this list, these are typical security operations services. Be aware of what you're actually going to be exercising and know if there's something that may have a cost component because you may want to head that off. As your program matures, meaning as you've done your first, second, third, fourth test, make sure that you use the right adversary group data and make sure that you can map your effectiveness against the MITRE attack process. And I'm going to show you one of these group structures right now. So MITRE's put together a lot of information on various groups. Empirically, they figured a lot of things out as they've been doing this for quite some time. And for this particular one, this is the APT3. It goes hand in hand with the spreadsheet I showed you. Think about the techniques that they use. This is what's been observed by this particular attack group. You can look at an individual tool and say, what does that organization use for software packing? And do I want to build that into my plan? So you could click on software packing and see what are examples of it, who uses it, and what types of tools are out there, and see if there's a mitigation or a defense. So this is another really useful tool that MITRE has put together when we're helping to design, and we can use this tool to help design our adversary processes. There's a number of candidates for your tool inventory, and I'm gonna swap to the next slide and show you a chart, and then I'm gonna come back to this one. The folks at Pentest IT maintain a pretty good list of some of the major tools out there, and they can tell you which tool actually goes with which part of the MITRE attack process. So I'm going to go back to the previous slide. So what are some candidates? APT Simulator, Microsoft Caldera, really good tools. Atomic Red Team Automation, RTA, Dumpster Fire. There's a lot of these tools out there, and there's a lot more Red Team tools than there are blue team tools. There's a couple of detection tools, though, that you should be aware of and really should use in your apparatus. If you don't have a packet capture or an analysis tool or a network intrusion detection, maybe you're a small shop, Security Onion is a phenomenal package. I'm going to be able to show you what some of the output of that looks like when I show you the example tool that we're going to show you at the end of the presentation here. Your build environment. Be aware that you do have to have a variety of things set up, and you don't want to be doing this in production. So Detection Lab is a nice tool that you can get. Chris Long created it. It's a script that runs and it builds an Active Directory for you, sets up a Splunk server, sets up a couple of Windows clients, downloads the MITRE Caldera tool, and implements OS queries. So it's basically a all-in-one tool set. So if you want to try to test out a technique on a Windows machine against an Active Directory domain or something like that, you have most of the things that you would need, and it becomes disposable. Just rerun the script. 4 or 5 hours later, you'll have a new one. Runs for both Bash and PowerShell. And I mentioned this before earlier. Game day. You've got everything. You've figured out. You've got your support. You're going to go ahead and actually, do your attack, right? Make sure you have air cover. You're probably going to use adversary simulation in a contained environment where you're going to be authorized to do it. You've gone to your VP, your authorizing party, your CISO, and you've given him or her your plan. They've approved it, and you want to make sure that you're capable of telling that authorizer or approver, we've rehearsed this, we've run the steps, we can do this under control, and we know what we're doing. Make sure that you have a willing partner. It's a phenomenally useful tool. I think I mentioned earlier the intern example we came for our insider threat scenario. Our willing partner was really good at that because we had our willing partner just responding via text message, and he was kind of playing dumb on our behalf. So it really sent the blue team through the loop, figuring out what is this kid doing. Make sure that you record results with a full timestamp. Your blue team. Are you going to announce the adversary simulation activity or not? Be aware of the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect, another business term, is a study that was done. And basically, the study found out that even when people were not being directly observed, if they thought that they were being observed, they behaved in a better manner, in a more productive manner. So the study goes that they were trying to determine how to make in a particular environment better, and they told staff members what they were doing was observing the amount of light in the room. It's kind of a big manufacturing facility, so they had folks on a catwalk looking at people, and just because people thought they were being observed, they performed differently than they do in regular circumstances. So be aware that human behavior changes if they are knowing that they're being observed. You probably want to do this in an unannounced fashion. Make sure that your normal processes are working. Have your detection event. You do want to make sure that your IR commander is not really aware that you're doing an incident response an adversary simulation activity. So they're trying to behave and collect the data, and they don't get lackadaisical. And realize that an outcome from your blue team should be the actual end product report. You may have a green team, or some people call it a white team. The green team is actively listening and observing. If you were to do this in conjunction with your internal audit division, may or may not want to do that, they would be the active, disinterested observer. Their goal is to protect the integrity of the event. They will grade both teams and produce an outcome briefing for you. That's kind of what the green team does. You'll have an after action event, information exchange. Make sure that you have objective criteria for your grading and your timeline. Make sure people know what they did. People wrote down their observations in writing. It's really good to have people just take an hour, make some notes, because it's not in your memory. They can test the notes they took. Incident response can very much like a tree with many, many different approaches and many different branches. And when I did cyber range stuff with various folks at the university, I probably had easily 150, 200 people go through a variety of scenarios. I rarely had 2 people solve a scenario in the same way. An incident response is very much a team sport. This is the other side of the adversary event. This is the blue team defense side. Make sure you're documenting as you go. A template makes a difference. You can choose your format. You can follow the SANS format, which, pick on Earl, preparation, identification, containment, errata recovery, lessons learned, or you can use more of a business type format of state your executive summary up front, describe the case, write your root cause, and give the timeline data. But what's important is that you have a template and you follow it. You do want to make sure that your after action is blameless, and encourage everyone to contribute and talk. You may have some folks who may not be happy with their performance, and you may have to kind of tease them out or encourage them to talk and share their experience. Just be aware from a human behavior perspective, you may have to be a really good facilitator in the outcome. Another thing that you want to think about is a really good activity for these adversary simulations. This was an article I picked up in doing research for this Pen Test magazine. The story goes that they're doing an activity, and because the blue team had access to a red team pen test person and they were dealing with a case, they brought the red teamer in and they said, this is what's going on. We have this event. And the red teamer in the moment looked at the live attack and kind of made a plan. And what the team did was in real time, that red teamer, that pen tester, did a scan because they saw where the attacker was first going. They found that weakness. They coordinated a change that the blue team then put in place with emergency change control. And within an hour, their adversary was actually attempting the very same thing that the red teamer had done. So, it may be an interesting thing for your adversary simulation exercise to bring in a pen test person and inject that into the scenario. It may give you an interesting dynamic. So we have some takeaways here I want to hit before I show you a tool that may be helpful for you. That's a very low cost tool. First thing is think 30 days. Identify your value chain. Talk to your business continuity DRP plan. Perform a threat analysis that should really help to inform your simulation plan. Determine what you're going to do. Know what you have, know what you can't break. That's important. 60 days, you should have enough of an environment to build out, stage, do some testing against things that look like your environment. Maybe if you use the detection lab model, you could then go pull all of your policies from your Active Directory domain and use that in the Active Directory in a detection lab environment, so that your Windows PC that you're going to use in that environment is instrumented exactly the same as your production domain. You got to think about your tooling, and you really do want to test. Plan your event. Practice makes perfect is very much a truth. And then you want to make sure that you have your air cover and line that up. As a goal, as an aspirational goal, think about performing one of these activities once a quarter or 4 times a year, if you can do that. On your game day, you run the simulation, observe your blue team, grade folks, determine what you're doing. Remember, you want to move the needle. So I want to end with, we don't necessarily do demos in these, but I thought it'd be a really good idea to give you an example of one of the tools that could be very effective. It's called BT3. It's an inexpensive tool. You can integrate this into your environment. Very easy to implement. Get Linux, register, pull down the API key. It's got a few tools built into it that generate real packet data for you on the network. Has a way to make things look like they're malicious by handling a hash condition. It's very low risk. It's very low risk because it's Python code. And it has a Metasploit-like user interface. So your adversary simulation side is similar to using Metasploit. Set your lhost option, generate the Python code, get the output. And then what you can do is go get that Python code, run that particular agent, and it's Python. You can run it on Windows if the libraries are there. You can run it on Linux. You can instrument it a variety of ways on a Linux box, like you could add it to an install package. You could put it in a cron job. You have a lot of flexibility because it's Python. So I mentioned Security Onion. This is another tool that, if deployed on your network, can detect that particular activity. So here we picked a tool, tested a tool, determined if we can actually detect the tool. So we have at least one detection mechanism. If you're looking and seeing what this tool produces longitudinally over a period of time, I ran a simulation with a couple of machines. We got a variety of events that happened. And if you look at what happens when you run this tool over a day, you generate 31,000 events. I want to thank you for your time here with this presentation, and I really hope that I've helped you move the needle for your adversary simulation program.